order. And first up will be House Bill 151.
Nope, we need to do roll call.
Oh, we have to do roll call. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Just say it.
Here.
Everybody who's here, just
Hey,
say here.
Representative Allred,
Here.
Representative Andrew,
Here.
Representative Berger, Representative Brown,
Here.
Representative Clausten,
He's excused. He'll be back shortly.
Representative Lawley,
Here.
Representative Obermuller,
Here.
Representative Provenza,
Here.
Chairman Northrup.
Here. All right. Thank you.
Let's see how many people are watching.
How many people are watching? We're gonna do House Bill 151, property tax exemption in child care facilities. Representative Yin, it's your bill. Would you like to enlighten us?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Members of the committee, I bring you House Bill 151 and ask for your favorable support. You know, this is a good little bill. It is basically so the Wyoming Women's Foundation releases a self-sufficiency standard on what it takes to raise a family in Wyoming. And one of I think it's the second biggest cost outside of housing is childcare. And so we're talking about both infants and preschoolers. That 0 to 5 range is really something where we have a real lack of supply in the state of Wyoming, and it creates really high childcare costs across the state. In Teton County, so if you go to the Wyoming Women's Foundation website, they have a self-sufficiency calculator, and you can pull on the drop-down your individual county, and it'll tell you what the childcare costs look like for a preschooler, for an infant, et cetera. In Teton County, it's $1,778 a month for childcare costs for just one infant. This is just a bill to hopefully bring a little bit of a relief on trying to both incentivize new childcare facilities as well as possibly for the existing facilities, reduce the cost of what it takes to provide childcare, which can help all families across Wyoming a little bit of help with raising their family. So just to go through the bill, it's very simple. It really is just page 2 that adds a property tax exemption for nonprofits and governmental entities towards property that's used for childcare. And it makes sure that we're only talking about childcare facilities that are licensed under the specific childcare facilities certification licensing regime. And I didn't include commercial properties because I wanted to make sure that we weren't helping as a state, helping commercial entities make money off of a property tax exemption. However, you know, it's up to the committee's judgment on what they would like to do as a policy choice. If you look on the fiscal note, this is not the fiscal note that I thought I had. Let me bring up the bill on the website. I think the fiscal note was about 300,000. Let me bring it up on the website just so I make sure that I am not speaking out of turn. Okay, yeah, so it's saying it's indeterminable because we're not, the exemption doesn't designate commercial entities, and the reporting that the Department of Revenue has doesn't separate governmental nonprofit versus commercial. So if you exempted all of the facilities, including commercial properties classified as daycare facilities by the county assessors, it would be $322,310. Which is not a huge amount for what we could do to help alleviate some stress across the board in the state of Wyoming. And again, you know, that money goes towards essentially helping that we take care of children in the state of Wyoming, which I think is appropriate. So with that, I will answer any questions from the committee, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Questions for Representative Yin from the committee? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Yeah, Representative, or Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Yen. When facilities like like this, when they get a tax break and we say, yeah, it might cut, they might not, they'll get this savings right back to their, the people, their consumers. Do you think this also maybe raises the potential that because they're getting a tax break, now they can earn more money?
Representative Yin, go ahead.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's the reason that I didn't allow this tax break for commercial entities. I'm not interested in having a business profit over it. Again, it's the judgment of the committee on what they want to do to that. But we do have lots of nonprofit healthcare facilities that it wouldn't allow them to make more money because they're a nonprofit.
Further questions? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Sorry for being a little late, but just a point of clarification, do our government properties normally pay taxes, or are they already exempt?
Go ahead, Representative Yin.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's a good question. We do have exemptions for governmental purposes, and it's kind of been messy, and it's something that we tried to deal with over the interim. So some things are generally exempt, but there's some things that aren't, and there's a whole chapter in the statute to delineate what is or isn't, and it gets kind of messy. So sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't, which is unfortunate.
Certainly. Go ahead, Representative Allred.
Representative Yin, Chairman, Representative Yin. Is the point here then, since I can get tax exempt, that now maybe I don't charge quite as much? Is that the bottom line here?
Go ahead, Representative Yin.
So, Mr. Chairman, for facilities that already exist, I would hope that's the case, that if they don't have a property tax burden, they can also lower their costs that they charge to the folks who uses daycare facilities. For places where a facility doesn't exist, it could incentivize a new facility to open up if it makes the bottom line work out where they could function as a functional facility without the property tax burden.
Representative Brown, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Yin, what would stop a commercial entity from transferring over to become a nonprofit organization to take advantage of this benefit?
Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, nothing would prevent them. They would just have to choose to no longer be a profit-making entity for their shareholders or partners, et cetera, which, that could be a choice that a commercial childcare provider might decide to do if it means being able to take care of more kids.
Further questions? Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For nonprofit corporations, so I think there's a difference between the federal tax filing and then what the state constitutes as a nonprofit. What would we be referring to in that? And then would you have a preference if it was one or the other?
Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, that is an excellent question. I do not have enough details, and I would have to further research on whether there are nonprofits in our state business filings that don't constitute as federal nonprofits. So I'm not sure.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Lawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to, back to the fiscal note for a minute, Representative Yin. I assume that's the statewide number, the 322, 310. I assume in the scheme that this is under that the counties bear the burden of that cost of the exemption that this provides?
Representative Yin.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lawley, it is partially the burden is borne by the counties and the towns, but partially a big chunk of that burden is borne by the school districts, the school foundation account, right? So it's still our obligation as a state to fund the K through 12 system, however we need to fund it, but a big chunk of those property taxes are school foundation dollars.
Does the rest of can I follow up?
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does the rest of the statutory scheme sort of provide for how the county implements this? Do they, something's filed with them and then they acknowledge the exemption and then that's taken into account? Is that done, would be done at the county level?
Go ahead, Representative
So,
Yin.
Mr. Chairman, from my understanding, it would just be up to the assessor to assess it as a property tax exemption, which they pass to the county treasurer to say that you don't give this person a tax bill. The only person involved in the county level would be the county assessor to decide whether it qualifies for the property tax exemption.
And the tax,
Go ahead, follow up.
thanks. Can does the taxpayer though need to go in and say, there's this exemption and I believe I qualify for it?
Representative Young?
Mr. Chairman, because I don't have a property tax exempt property, I'm not quite sure what the way that would work with the assessor, but my understanding is that the assessor already has the information in their tax roll of what a piece of property is being used for, so it should be automatic, but I think if there is an assessor that would know, I can ask my current one if there isn't one that's going to testify.
Thank you.
Representative Brown, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So Representative Yen, I'm looking up 144101A6. And it comes up and it tells us that a child caring facility means any person who operates a business to keep or care for any minor at the request of parents, legal guardians, or any agency which is responsible for this. And then it lists all the way A through O. And it's a pretty expansive list, to be honest with you. Children's institution, detention homes, group daycare agencies, correctional schools, ranches for children, whether for summer operation or otherwise. So my understanding was that we're trying to keep this very narrowly tailored, but when we open it up underneath 144101A6, it actually expands it pretty drastically. So I guess I'm just kind of curious, are we actually trying to keep it very narrowly tailored, or was your intention to expand this out because this mentions going into the business side of things as opposed to nonprofit? So just kind of curious your thoughts on that.
Go ahead, Representative Young.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, Representative Brown. So it is a relatively broad list, but some of those things I think already fall under another governmental exemption like correctional schools and detention homes. However, you know, I thought about whether it makes sense to limit it a little bit more, having seen that list previously. But when I saw the fiscal note, I didn't think it was that big of an ask just to make it broad enough to cover all of those, because I think all of those have to do with childcare in some form or fashion, and I think it's appropriate.
Further questions? Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if a nonprofit wants to get this exemption and they dedicate part of their organization to childcare, does it bring their entire operation under this? Let's say 10% of their operation now becomes childcare.
Go ahead, Representative Young.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, so on page 2, lines 2 and 3, it is the property that is used for childcare facilities. So from my understanding, that wouldn't bring in all of an operation for something that's more broad than childcare. It's just the facilities that cover the childcare portion.
Good question for the department. Anybody else? Got any more questions?
I do have one.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I am kind of curious on this because we had also Representative Heiner's bill that came through just recently, and we've opened that up. And this might be more directed towards the department on this. But when I go and I look at A6 it says any person not legally related to a minor having legal or physical care, custody, or control of the child receiving payment for. How would this maneuver with Representative Heiner's bill that we just released a whole bunch of authority potentially, if that bill goes into law? Does this then exempt potentially a whole bunch of people from their homeowners tax code and having to look at this? Because the way I read O is potentially opens them up to this tax break as well.
Go ahead, Representative Young.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, that is a very interesting question. You know, I think that is a policy discussion that I think might be worthwhile to have on the floor or in the committee to decide whether we want to have that subsection big O be eligible for a property tax exemption.
Representative Young, if we just added certified into that, would that be outside of the realm of what you were thinking of, so that it was a certified daycare facility?
Mr. Chairman, I think that would fit the bill. Yes.
So then that would take out. Questions from the committee? Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just curious how you think about the competitive advantage that this would give a nonprofit over a profit organization.
Go ahead, Representative Young.
Mr. Chairman, I think it's possible that it might help a nonprofit over a for-profit organization. That's very possible, but my intention from a policy standpoint is to help reduce the cost of childcare for kids around the state.
All right, further questions from the committee? Thank you. I'll ask both departments to come up, Department of Revenue and Department of Health first. Yes, they are. Yes, please, go ahead, Department of Revenue.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Brenda Henson, Director of the Department of Revenue, and with me I have Brian Judkins, the Property Tax Division Administrator. Just some brief comments related to the administration of this bill. This notes, first and foremost, it says property of a governmental entity or nonprofit corporation. So the first thing that would have to happen is that would have to be proven. If it's real property, it's via a deed. Granted, county assessors get access to those deeds and a mailing address, but they certainly don't have any information related to if that's a governmental entity or a nonprofit. I mean, if it's Laramie County, certainly they understand that. But I will let you know that for governmental property of any kind, they still are required to file an application to be considered for an exemption. And then the assessor's charged by law of making that determination, either granting the exemption or denying the exemption, and that can actually be appealed to the County Board of Equalization if the property owner disagrees. As far as the child care facilities, now, in my mind, child care facilities would be real property. So the question then is this also to include personal property, furniture, fixtures, equipment that are used within that child care facility? And if so, you may wish to clarify that. And the other piece of that is that we don't have documented ownership of that personal property. That is provided by the taxpayer to the county assessor on an annual basis via their personal property declaration. And then I would anticipate that there would be an application for an exemption that would accompany that declaration. Now, do they need to apply every year? Typically not. Typically, once the exemption has been granted, unless ownership changes, a deed is recorded, or the equipment is being reported by someone else, typically the exemption would follow through from year to year. With that, Mr. Judkins, have I missed anything?
Thank you, Director Hanson. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, a little more clarity I could provide. There was a question asked on.
Brian, introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brian Judkins with the Department of Revenue Property Tax Division. There was a question asked earlier on are government agencies already exempt? Excuse me. There was a case with a child care facility where a governmental agency was leasing out that space for a child care facility. So, and what we look at is if it's used for a governmental purpose, and that was the argument of being taxed or exempt from taxation.
Questions for either of them? Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I guess my question would be, so I'm thinking here in this community, we have Laramie County Community College that has a child care facility inside of this. I don't know who runs and operates the actual facility. I don't know if it's a for-profit organization, if it's done by the community college, but let's just assume for argument's sake that this was a private business being leased out, then this would apply not to them, or it would apply to them to receive that exemption.
Go ahead, Brian. Mr. Judkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, without this bill, the assessor would look at, is it a governmental use? So with this bill, if it's a nonprofit or a governmental entity that is providing that business, then it would be exempt from taxation. Little more clarity I wanted to give on the fiscal note, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please do, sir.
The roughly 322,000 in tax revenue is specifically related to buildings within our CAMA system. The assessor has to classify those buildings or what the use is. So this would not be attributable to any daycare facilities that, someone is running out of their household. So this would only be attributable to buildings that are actually built as a daycare facility, if that makes sense. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Mr. Chairman. I'm looking at the $322,000, and then I'm thinking the administrative burden on the state and the department, and just trying to weigh out the value of $322,000 spread across the whole state versus what it's going to do to maybe some of our agencies. So I guess that's my question is, what kind of administrative burden will this put on some of our agencies?
Director Hansen, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, so exemptions are a policy decision. We have numerous exemptions for property taxation, and so it simply is a matter of receiving the application by the county assessor. The entire process would be administered, as previously noted, by the county assessor to make that determination whether it's taxable or not. As far as our piece of that, we do have Chapter 14 rules and regulations related to property tax exemptions and hoping to provide clarity there. But that would really be the only administrative items. So that would not be a cost to government in that regard. But you are correct, of the $322,000, that is looking at all of the mills that are collected for property tax. So the 12 mills for the school foundation, the 25 mills for the school district, 6 mills, county school fund, and then breaking it all down to the 12 mills for the county, 8 mills if it's in a municipality. All of those entities would receive that assessed value less. But the point being that we don't have a significant number of childcare facilities that are currently on the tax rolls in the state of Wyoming.
Representative Lawley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the issue of the governmental purpose, and you talked about a specific situation where a government building, there was a child care, and the issue became, was that a governmental function? What was the decision on that? I'm just curious. Did they consider that a governmental function or not? And therefore, I could know from that answer, I think, which way the taxation implications went.
Go ahead, Mr. Judkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If Director Henson would correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and I think they found in favor of the assessor.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead. Please.
But that's under current law. If the Supreme Court had found, Mr. Chairman, that a child care facility was a governmental purpose, there would not be a need for this bill.
Representative Obermuller, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you give us a definition of what a nonprofit organization is?
Go ahead, Mr. Judkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For property tax purposes, we don't consider nonprofit if a 501c3, something on that category, that is typically not considered for property taxation. So, Mr. Chairman and Representative Obermuller, I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question.
Further questions from the committee?
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
could you restate? I didn't follow that answer, actually. Does the Revenue Department have a definition for what nonprofit is?
Go ahead, Director.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Obermuller, so our rules tend to, if there's a statutory reference that states nonprofit corporation, then we look to a 501c3 for guidance. We do have some rules that guide the assessor to that specific piece. I will tell you there are numerous nonprofit corporations that are not exempt from property taxation because there is no exemption for that type of use. But in this situation, if this were to pass, it specifically says a nonprofit corporation that is used for childcare facility. So as long as they're filing as a nonprofit for the federal government, we would deem that applicable here.
You follow up, Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman?
follow up.
Would you agree that a nonprofit does not mean that they don't make a profit? That the distinction is based on other factors besides whether they make a profit or not?
Go ahead, I'm sorry, Director Hansen.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, you're right. We are not involved in any of the process related to the federal government and whether or not they're deemed as a nonprofit. But we have to have some sort of a measure. And so that is what we've relied on in the past.
Just one follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly, second follow-up.
Yeah, thank you. So would you agree that that a nonprofit is basically defined in terms of how they're allowed to distribute their retained earnings rather than how much money they actually make?
Go ahead,
Miss-
Director.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Obermuller, the only response that I have is I recognize that nonprofit corporations are the largest growing sector in for 501c3. There are many different categories, but with that, I do not know the intricacies of distribution.
Okay, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think I probably got an answer from you already, but in this bill, we have just nonprofit corporation, and so I'm wondering if inserting the 26 US code for 501c3s would be a better definition for that, referencing that IRS code, so it's not necessarily because I think the state nonprofit is broader, that doesn't have as many restrictions. Does that make sense, or is that something that would maybe be problematic?
Director, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I know historically in the structure of statutes, we've been hesitant to reference other documents, whether it be federal government documents specific to a name. But it is certainly something that we have done within our rules. But if the will of the body is to include that reference in statute, it certainly would provide additional guidance.
Further questions for the Department of Revenue? Representative Lawley, go ahead.
So again, how will a county assessor navigate all of this? Like under 501c3, as I understand it, there are certain categories that are fairly clear, that if you fall in that, you don't need a specific certificate from the federal government that you meet that, you just meet it. A church is a good example of that, for example. And then there are other provisions of 501c3 that you can fall under that category, but you are going to have the burden as an organization to go and seek from the federal government a declaration, if you will, a certificate that you meet those requirements as a 501c3. So we've kind of waded into a little bit of deep water here. And I go back to the county assessor, who I really like my county assessor, and I'm thinking about, the navigating of this on these kinds of issues and the broadness of the Wyoming nonprofit statute versus the 501c3, and how does that work? How would that work practically?
Go ahead, Director Hansen.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, so I will state that exemptions are one of the most challenging pieces of a county assessor's job. And in this specific statute, we've got a couple moving parts here. First and foremost, the courts have deemed that if you are a governmental entity, the presumption is that you are exempt from property taxation unless the assessor proves otherwise. By the other hand, on a nonprofit corporation, they're not government. So the presumption is that they're taxable until they prove that they are exempt. So you've got a couple moving parts related to administration of taxation with this. But certainly, it's important that to recognize that the county assessor will have that burden on them to ensure that they have the documentation that they believe satisfies that, whether they deem them tax exempt or deny that exemption.
Further questions for Department of Revenue? Not appearing. Thank
Thank
you
you,
very
Mr.
much for
Chairman.
coming. Appreciate it. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Roxanne O'Connor, Support Services Senior Administrator for Department of Family Services. If you remember last week, which might be hard, Director Schmidt was up here and she was talking about maybe the need for some modernization with our Title 14 statute that we use for childcare licensing, but also for substitute care licensing. So our group homes, our residential treatment centers, our psychiatric residential treatment facilities, all of those fall under this statute that we are looking at right now. So under 14.4.1016. So Representative Brown, to your point, it is broad and it's very all-encompassing. And so if that is the will of the committee to have that broad scope, then that's certainly your will. But when we look at childcare facilities, the way that we traditionally think of it with our youngest children in care, that would really fall under Title 14.4.101A6K. So just to help provide some clarification there. I stand for questions.
Want to read that?
Do you want me to?
Just go right ahead. Read K, so everybody knows what it is. Representative Brown.
All right, so I'll read 6 first. Child caring facility means any person who operates a business to keep or care for any minor at the request of parents, legal guardians, or an agency which is responsible for the child and includes any of the following privately operated facilities. K is day or hourly nurseries, nursery schools, kindergartens, or any preschool establishment not accredited by the State Board of Education.
Pretty good. So my question is, if we make it a certified daycare facility, will that tighten that up enough to be acceptable? Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, no. Just because in this, a child care facility that falls under Title 14.4.101 could be any of those child care institutions, and they'd be certified. And so if we're looking to narrow the scope to just the smallest, our youngest population, that really falls under K. Because all of these entities that are listed in Title 14.4.101 are certified. They're licensed by us already.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarity. Questions from the committee? None? Thank you, Roxanne. All right, anybody else like to comment on the bill? Anybody else like to comment on the bill? Anybody online? All right, thank you. With that, we'll close public testimony and start to work the bill. Representative Yin, would you like to join us? Okay, committee, what is your pleasure? Moved by Provenza, seconded by Andrew. Almost said Ocean. Okay. As we look at the bill and you look at page 1, is there anything you would like to amend or work on page 1, committee? Okay, the meat of the bill is in page 2. Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did look up to see if we had the 501c3s listed in any of our statutes, and it actually is in a separate section, or I think paragraph of this statute. So I would like to motion for an amendment on page 2, line 2, insert before nonprofit, insert 26 USC 501 parentheses C parentheses 3. So 501c3 nonprofit entity.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we insert the USC 501c3 nonprofit entities. Any discussion on that? None appearing, will proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Thank you. Good amendment. Anybody else? Go ahead. Representative Ocean. Andrews.
Mr. Chairman, there was some discussion about defining property, whether that's real property or personal property, and they assumed it was real property. There is another Romana under the same statute where they specified real and personal property. And I'm wondering, that is my amendment, is to add real and personal property to this, just so there's not confusion.
And where would you like to put that? And
Oh, I'm sorry,
What
Mr.
section?
Chairman, on page 2, at line 1, at the very beginning.
okay, it's been moved and seconded that we insert real and personal property. Actually, real and personal in front of property. Any questions or comments from the committee? None appearing, will proceed to vote. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed?
No.
2 noes. Anybody else? Just 2? Okay. Yeah, that amendment passes. Any further amendments? Go ahead, Representative Obermuller. Just go ahead, discussion then.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm still trying to understand the scope of this. So at this point, we potentially have kind of regulated, unregulated child care in this state. So if the child care is happening in a personal residence, it becomes, does that facility, the home, fall into this category, and now it's exempt from property tax? If, let me follow up, if they go ahead and organize as a nonprofit for the business.
Representative Yen, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, if we put in that uppercase K subsection to make sure that they are certified, regulated facilities, then I think that's appropriate, because there is a cost in addition to a nonprofit or a family doing it in their homes to create that certification. So I would think that's appropriate, but again, happy to hear the committee's discussion on it.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
This might be more appropriate for the department, but I am curious. The department does not necessarily get into the IRS taxation, but my question is, I know that if you have a home inside your house, you can only write off a portion of that particular side of your house. Would that then be the same if they are attempting to do a property tax exemption and they file themselves underneath the 501c3, they deed it over to their house over to that? Does the entire house then become available for that? I'm really trying to wrap my brain around this and what could ultimately occur with this.
Representative Yen, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think there are rules around whether you can, because then anyone would be able to exempt their entire house. I think that you can only limit it to the space that actually is the work area, right? So if you're using things for personal uses, you can't actually file that in your federal income taxes as exempting that personal property in that area if you widen it to your entire house, right? Like I wouldn't be able to exempt my bed from personal income tax if I made my whole house a nonprofit.
Director Hanson, would you like to enlighten us how the department views this?
Mr. Chairman, Brenda Henson, Department of Revenue. So we would look at primary use. What is the primary use of that property? If the primary use is a residential structure, it's occupied, then it's valued and assessed in its entirety as a residential structure. Very similar to a bed and breakfast or a dude ranch. A dude ranch is primarily a ranch, but they also have the sideline of providing lodging so we have these types of situations, but for this exemption, those property owners that have in-home childcare facilities, they report to the county assessor their equipment, furniture, fixtures, and equipment that are purchased with the funds from the childcare. So they aren't reporting all of the other items within their home that aren't owned by the childcare itself. And so based on the amended language, I would believe that it would be the equipment that they would be asking for the exemption, and that the entire facility, as long as the primary use is residential, would be taxable. Now, in the situation where if the entire structure, even though it was built as a house, if it was only being used in a commercial operation, then the primary use is commercial, and then it could in fact, if owned by the nonprofit, it could in fact be exempt from property taxation under this language.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Director Henson. Further questions on the committee? Any more comments? Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be voting no on this, and it's mainly because one of my biggest pet peeves in our tax system is the amount of exemptions that we offer. That is the only reason I'll be doing this, is we are adding yet another exemption. I had this entire room filled with every single lobbyist that hated exemptions on a bill because I tried to remove exemptions from sales tax. We're continuing to nitpick away at our basis for revenue generation in this state. While I understand the need for this, and need is probably a strong word, but the want for this, I cannot in good conscience continue to add more exemptions to our tax code when it was just less than 2 years ago, we were trying to find a way to come up with $660 million. So yes, it's only $330,000, and I did have an exemption bill this year to try to do back to school. I get it. I'm right there with you, but we're just nitpicking away at this, and I'm not sure that I can support this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further comments from the committee? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Come on. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I love the intent of this bill. I don't think it's ready. I think it needs to be worked more. I feel like there's gonna be a lot more things that are gonna pop up, and it's gonna cost us more than the 322,000. So I'll be voting no.
Okay. Anybody else? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Usually I hate exemptions too. I'd be happy to co-sponsor a bill with Representative Brown to remove all of them next year, even after we pass this one, maybe. But, so I'm supporting this bill in part. I think moving forward with this, what I would like to see though would be potentially figuring out how to do amendments to make sure that we're doing certified places in lieu of some of the comments that I made about our other home daycares. So I'll be looking to do that if the committee moves this forward. I do think that this is at least signaling in a good direction and hopefully creating some opportunity for more childcare in a state that is a desert of childcare. So, thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I think this is a good bill, and I would just urge the committee that if there is anything that you think is not ready, this is the first step of many, many steps in the process, and I'm sure the good representative would be willing to work with us to solve any concerns. So, on and for the bill. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? We'll proceed to vote then. Sensing your desire to vote. Thank you. Go ahead and call roll, please, Diane.
Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Andrew,
Aye.
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
No.
Representative Clauston,
No.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Obermueller,
No.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye.
That's 6 ayes and 3 noes do pass with amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to work on any amendments on the floor from any of the committee members.
Next bill for our consideration is House
He
Bill,
took his bill.
I did, I took a bill.
House Bill
201.
201.
Mr. Chairman.
Take it away.
Thank you.
Chairman
Mr. Chairman,
Norton.
as we sat and listened to the governor's address, and he was talking about the EMT that got killed on the highway down on I-80, I thought, but what about the children? And, because I realized he had 3 kids, and I made that shot, a little note off to the side and just said, what about the kids? What's gonna happen to the kids? And I realized that they may move out of the state, they may get remarried, not they, but the mother may get remarried. Whatever the case may be with all first fallen, or all of our fallen first responders, that things happen and life goes on and people move out of the state and they've always, well, like me, decided to come back to the state. So it kind of gives, this bill kind of gives those kids a chance to come back and take advantage of the Hathaway. It gets their foot in the door, and that's all it does, because on the section 2 part of it, that there is actually that whole 21-16304, where they have to be, remain eligible to keep the bill, or to keep under Hathaway. So what I have done, committee, on page 2 is added a section into the Hathaway saying, notwithstanding, in this section, a student whose custodial parent or guardian was killed in the line of duty while acting as a first responder, and that's as defined in Wyoming statute, and the parent or guardian was a Wyoming resident at time of the parent or guardian's death, and if the student is a high school graduate of a high school outside of the Wyoming accredited by the appropriate regional accrediting agency, means out-of-state school that he graduated from that was in good standing with the accrediting agency, the student shall be deemed to have graduated in an eligible high school in Wyoming and for the purpose of qualifying under this article. So then I had a young man come to me from the firefighters and said, so does that include firefighters who have died in the line of duty? And what if they get exposed to something and they die later? And so that's the amendment that I have, that I'd like to add into this, is that on line 216, we're just gonna add in after duty, or whose death was caused by an exposure in the line of duty to a toxin, poison, carcinogen, or hazardous material as defined by Wyoming statute. So we're just carrying in a bigger group of people who are working in that facility or working in this area of business, and when they either get sick and die or are killed immediately, as in the case of the I-80 incident, that there's a provision for those kids later in life if they so choose, and they're the ones who have to initiate it. I stand for questions.
Committee? Representative Berger.
Vice Chairman Obermuller, Mr. Chairman. On page 3, line 15, it says at least a 2.5 GPA. And then on page 5, line 2, with a minimum cumulative high school GPA of 2.5. What's the difference there in those two? Do we need to say 2.5 on the other one as well?
Actually, that is in our, excuse me, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On line 3, or on page 3,
Yeah.
line 15, that is old language that was within the Hathaway Scholarship. The
Okay.
part that is inserted into that is right above it where it starts and says, and fallen first responder. So before it read, for Hathaway Opportunity Scholarships, at least a 2.25 GPA was required.
Yes.
Okay.
Then,
And so all we did at that point was just add in for the fallen responders
okay,
at that point. Okay, then on page 5, these are the conditions with which that person can ask to get a Hathaway. And with the minimum cumulative high school GPA of 2.5 and a score equal to or greater than you can read the rest of it.
Yep.
That they can come in and get it. So what I just said was, instead of saying 2.25, they got to be 2.5. It's just a little bit step higher and that it's just an opportunity. So that's the difference in 2 grades. I made it just infinitesimally higher.
Representative Berger, any follow-up?
Yeah, follow up,
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman. Thanks, Representative Northrop. Mr. Chairman, it's pretty traumatic to lose a father or a mother in a situation like that, and I think it's hard on kids. So I'm just wondering if we should. I understand the 2.5, and it's a great, but I think if we're asking 2.25 and 40th percentile, I was, just because their mindset. And I know we're trying to give them that opportunity, but what do you think about that?
Chairman Northrop?
If the committee would like to amend that to make it the same as it is for the entrance, the minimum grade requirement for the opportunity, that's fine with me. I'm just more interested in providing an avenue for these kids to get a good education and show that the state of Wyoming cares about their education.
Representative Berger, follow-up? Anyone else? Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 4, line 16, we talk about parent or guardian was Wyoming resident at the time of their death. I guess I have a question about, excuse me, anyone who's serving as a first responder in our state who maybe has to live out of the state of Wyoming. I don't know how frequent that is, but I know that we have folks that travel on our east side of the state to work in some facilities, and so I'm wondering about their children. Would we want to intentionally leave them out or bring them in? What is your thought on that?
Chairman Northrop.
So I think that, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think that maybe that it's on line 13, same page, when it says any student whose custodial parent or guardian was killed in line of duty, that I was thinking of, and that the parent or guardian was a Wyoming resident at the time. If they're working in Wyoming, maybe we could make an amendment that just says that if they're working in Wyoming and live outside and they're killed on the line, in the line of duty, that they could be, but it kind of muddies the water. So it's for a very select group. I mean, understand, I hope this group of children does not blow up here, and become a large group of kids. I'd rather keep these people alive and doing their job.
Representative Costin.
Thank you. The way it's written is we have a dollar amount in here, which is equal to the honors level. In time, I would expect that honors level Hathaway scholarship may grow. Give a lot of attention to inflation, that kind of thing. Would you be against, instead of putting a dollar amount in here that would have to go back and change again in the future, would you be open to consistent at the honors level Hathaway scholarship?
Chairman Northrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a great idea, Representative Clausen. I think that tying that back to that level would be much better, because as we make adjustments to what's happening in Hathaway, as it's inflated over the years, that'll be a lot better idea than putting the dollar value into it.
Follow up?
Thank you.
Anyone else? Committee? Chairman Northrop, if you stand by while we call up the agencies. Does any agencies want to weigh in on this topic? Doesn't look like there is. Any other public comment on this bill? Come on up. State who you are, who you represent for the committee, please.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Erin Edwards. I'm a platoon captain with the Laramie County Fire Authority, and I'm here to speak on behalf of this bill. Before I get started, I would like to state that some members of the committee may recognize me for my position as a state risk manager. However, I would like to go on record and let the committee and anyone listening know that I am not here in my capacity as a state employee. I am here on my personal time in my capacity as a first responder and have taken time off from work to be here this afternoon. Wyoming first responders are a very special group of people. It is a special person who continually steps up and puts themselves into harm's way to help their neighbors, fellow citizens, and people that they don't know. But they know when people need help, it's their calling to go see what can be done no matter what the circumstances are. Wyoming is very lucky to have so many first responders across the spectrum between full-time paid folks and volunteer first responders. This is truly a neighbors helping neighbors type of state. Unfortunately, the calling can be dangerous and can result in the loss of a first responder's life. As Representative Chairman Northrup had indicated, we lost a first responder recently just before Christmas on I-80. I can tell you firsthand, the devastation felt by the loss of a first responder in the line of duty is massive. For the families of those first responders, it is immeasurable. Unfortunately, I have witnessed the impact of such a loss to those families multiple times over my 20-year career in the fire service, to include the losses of some of my friends. At the end of the day, it's not only a fallen first responder who has made the ultimate sacrifice, their families have also made a sacrifice. They watched as their first responder walked out the door to help someone. They worked around their first responder's schedule when their first responder missed various holidays with the family. The families knew their first responder was out helping people when they missed their children's sporting events and various activities. Some families even missed entire summers with their first responder when they left to go help fight wildland fires all over the country and even here in Wyoming. The sacrifice fallen first responders and their families have made is not something that can ever be fully fixed or made better for the families that are left behind, nor should it ever be taken for granted by the people they served. Though such a loss can never be fixed, there are things that can help ease the pain and future burdens. The passing of House Bill 201 will help the children of fallen Wyoming first responders further their educational goals at Wyoming colleges, while helping to ease the burden of what may have become a single income household upon the loss of their first responder. It is a way to welcome the children of fallen Wyoming first responders back into the state, both with open arms and gratitude for the service and sacrifice of their first responder and those families. I ask that the committee please consider voting in favor of House Bill 201 so that the families of fallen Wyoming first responders have as much help as they can in moving forward without their loved ones who have made the ultimate sacrifice for Wyoming and her citizens. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Thank you for your service to the community. Before you go, does anyone have any questions for this witness? Okay, I guess not. Next.
There's 3 chairs up here.
Introduce yourself and who you represent.
Mr. Chairman, or I guess I should say Mr. Vice Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I'd like to offer you a little bit of, what should I call it, background or perspective or whatever. It's not generally known, but the children of Medal of Honor winners are eligible, if they're otherwise qualified, for an appointment to the service academies. They don't compete for it, they just apply for it. And if they're qualified, receive it. In the 1960s, after the Thresher and the Scorpion disaster, the submarine force, actually the Wives organization, set up the Dolphin Scholarship Fund for the children of those submariners lost on those 2 ships. And when that business was taken care of, they then expanded it to what amounts to the parallel of what you're talking here for Wyoming families. And that is an ongoing thing for the last 50-some years. So there's a lot of reason why this is a good idea. I support the bill. I'd offer you might want to consider something for it too. I spoke up on a bill down in the Jonah building on presumptive disability for firefighters. And these are firefighters that come down with various cancers and other things from the stuff they have to breathe when they go into a building. But they're necessarily not an immediate line of duty type death. It can take months to years to come up, but the kind of cancers they apparently come down with are pretty clearly associated with what they breathed while on duty. I had a fire on one of my ships once in a career thing. We were probably breathing some metals, vaporized metals during it. So subject to your questions, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anyone, any questions? Mr. Winnie. Thank you. Anyone else? Come up and introduce yourself, who you represent.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Byron Odick, I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police, rising in support of the bill. As you can imagine, because this would impact law enforcement officers and all first responders, which I appreciate the crafting that it would include all first responders. A thought of clarification as well for you as you consider and deliberate. It's rare, but it happens, that we would have a Wyoming first responder go out of state. Now, in the fire service, that happens more often and can lead to and be exposed to some very deadly circumstances. That happens across the board in first responders, as I mentioned, for the law enforcement side as well. Likewise, we also bring in first responders to the state. Again, happens rarely on the law enforcement side, but when it does, it's that expertise that's necessary and sometimes in some very dangerous situations, Mr. Chairman. So I'd ask that the bill be somewhat flexible, as it appears to be, although it does talk about Wyoming resident being killed in the line of duty. We do have some first responders who may not be Wyoming residents at the time that they are acting on Wyoming's behalf, and something tragically happens to them. So, Mr. Chairman, with respect to the bill, I would ask that you consider making sure that those responders that act on Wyoming's behalf receive Wyoming's benefit.
Thank you,
Mr.
sir.
Chairman.
Committee, any questions? Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. Anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, I will close public testimony. Do you want to come back up and help us through this bill? Okay, committee, let's take a look at this.
Move the bill, Mr. Chairman.
I second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Shall we take a walk through it and see if there's any amendments?
Mr. Chairman.
Page 1.
I just have a comment.
Yes, sir.
As I got to listening to the discussion from Representative Berger, and it just being verified from an attorney on that helped draft this bill, the 2.5 GPA plus the 2.25, that's the difference of being able to qualify initially versus being able to stay qualified. So I don't think we need to go in and adjust this. And then as far as the ability to keep everything going as far as where that's at, I don't think we need any amendments there, Mr. Chairman. And there, I don't believe, again, coming from the information that I just received, it doesn't look like there's a Hathaway scholarship for anything underneath the 2.5 anyways, so.
All right, thank you, Representative Brown. Any other general comments before we just work the bill? How about any amendments on page 1? Page 2? Page 3? Page 4?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Brown.
Chairman Northrop, do you have the language available to us? Is it up in this package? Okay, I'm running off of digital, so sorry. I actually would like to go back and move the proposed amendment that you see before you, which is actually on page 2, line 16, and then page 4, line 14. And I'm not going to read all of the information, but this was discussed by the chairman. I'd move this amendment.
It's been moved by Representative Brown, seconded by Representative Lawley. Committee, discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That amendment passes. Representative Brown.
I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
Any other amendments on page 4? Page 5. Representative Clouston.
Strike the dollar amount and put in funding consistent with the honors level of the Hathaway Scholarship.
Second.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just question, do we have in statute a paragraph or something to point to that has that we could maybe throw in with that amendment Or is that language going to be sufficient without that to ensure that it meets the statutory requirements of how we're writing the bill?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, can you weigh in on this?
Yes, I would just say that if you'll allow the amendment to be conformed by LSO so that they can hammer it out correctly and that we don't mess it up here.
That sounds like a good idea, Mr. Chairman. Any problem with that? Okay. All in favor of that amendment to broaden the, or to incorporate language that isn't restrictive as to dollar amount, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we'll have LSO draft the language to fix that. Any other amendments on page 5? Going once, going twice.
Mr. Chairman, Vice Chairman, could I ask for clarification on what you want on page 5 at lines 9 through 11? Or is it just, you just said
Mr.
have
Chairman, would you
LSO
address-
draft?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, would you address that for us, please?
Yes, we will go to LSO and make sure that we get something in the line on maybe through statute or wherever it is, but something that says funding consistent with the honor scholarship as according to Wyoming statute, blah, 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 whatever it is. And that way we can make sure that we get that stated correctly and it's not fumbled here in this committee room.
Good.
Say it, Mr. Chairman.
Okay,
Mr.
thank you.
Chairman?
Other questions? You have a question,
Thank you,
Representative Berger?
Is, Mr. Vice Chairman, is there a statute called blah, blah, blah?
I believe it is section 300, thank you.
You're about ready to hear it, yeah.
All right, any other questions, any other issues, amendments for this bill?
Question on
Yes,
the-
we're, all right, call for the question. We're ready to vote. Diana, if you'll take the roll.
Okay, Representative Allred,
Aye.
Representative Andrew,
Aye.
Representative Berger,
Aye.
Representative Brown,
Aye.
Representative Clausten,
Aye.
Representative Lawley,
Aye.
Representative Obermuller,
Aye.
Representative Provenza,
Aye.
Chairman Northrup.
Aye.
That's 9 ayes, do pass with amendment.
Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
I'd just like to also wish Miss Edwards a happy birthday and thank you for coming to testify, so.
Yes, happy birthday. Thank you.
Should we sing?
Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Miss Edwards. Happy birthday to you. Are we hired? Okay.
Thanks for humoring me.
Yes, thanks for humoring us. All right, we're on House Bill 167, the Wyoming Teacher Shortage Loan Program. Go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bill Henderson, bringing the House Bill 167. Committee, I appreciate your time. This is a reauthorization of a very important program that I feel is very applicable to address our teacher shortage that we all know about. This program was in place in between 2005, 2016, and facilitated about 160 new teachers in special ed, math and science, and world language. And what you see on this bill is if you go to page 2, what we're doing, I think it still involves these important areas, but it opens it up so that what we're targeting is shortage areas. And so certification is the key piece here of teachers and the eligibility for additional endorsements. On page 3, at the bottom there, starting about line 14, and particularly on 19, the focus of this effort is to give people options. You know best what's going on in your area and what you're doing in terms of your career. And we're losing a lot of good teachers, a lot of good experience at the expense of our young people in our local schools. And so this is a very successful program, I think. Over the time it was in place, the average, you wonder how I got to 500,000 on the appropriation. Well, we haven't used it for a while. And so if you look at the period of time that was in place, of course, early in the period, there were more applicants. And so there was a little higher cost. But the average is around 400,000 a year. So I rounded it up to 5. Good even number. And the key here is, as you see in the fiscal note, is the demand that's out there. Well, think about it. If we open this up to everyone who's interested in becoming a teacher, and I hope there are a lot of them, I hope we have to come back and add more money to it. I really do. You have all kinds of people in various places in their careers. I think about the people who are classified, of folks working in our schools. They work very hard. They don't make a lot of money, but they've learned a lot in the process that they've experienced with the schools. And I think it's important that they be given perhaps the opportunity to take the loan. This is a loan program, right? Keyword loan. And it's also kind of a job security program. You think about those 160 teachers I spoke of, that's about 320 man years of good certified teachers for Wyoming. Just imagine if we could expand that. And so that's basically the bill, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate any questions.
Questions for Representative Henderson? Go ahead, Representative Clauston.
Thank you, Chairman. Good representative, you know, I was working on the same bill, so thank you for bringing this. So my only question here is on page 3, line 16. It says, address teacher shortage in the targeted areas. How will the targeted areas be determined?
Go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Good question. And we'll continue working hard together on this important thing. So we have a lot of talent pipelines, a lot of important pieces coming together related to helping our teacher shortage, or, you know, eliminating it, right? Not helping it, but getting rid of it. And so these folks who are looking at these things bring good information. We're coming up on a period that's called recalibration. That's one way to address those shortage areas. But we also have folks who are there every day, and we have a very good department that interacts daily with the districts. And I think a lot of that information is going to come from them in terms of the shortage areas. And my hope is that we'll be able to have options for these good people to as I say, to go from where they are to become a certified teacher. So those shortage areas, I can't specifically point at one. I don't want to call them out because I think all of Wyoming matters. I think we all want our kids to be in a good education environment. I would use this important point. This is one of the reasons why I brought this bill. I was working on another bill and talking to a constituent, listening really, and he said to me, you know, we have good schools, we have good facilities, but what's most important is the quality of the teacher, right? And so I think that's something to strive for and work together on. So I hope that answers your question.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, follow up.
Somewhat, you know, I guess I would just like it maybe to be determined on, is it the local school board figuring out what's the targeted area? Is it the state board? Is it the Department of Education? I think we just need to, I don't want the legislature picking the target.
I got it. So,
go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So as you see in the bill, as before, the program has the college commission. And we have the good leader of that here with us today. And I think I'm going to phone a friend on this, Mr. Chairman, and ask her if she'd like to help me answer this question.
Would the community college like to come up and loan out your expertise for us for a little bit? Here we go. Dr. Caldwell, good to see you again.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it is always a pleasure to be here. I am Sandy Caldwell, Executive Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission, and I'm going to let my colleague introduce himself. He has quite a bit of information.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Michael Swank. Chief Financial Officer with the commission. And could the questioner please restate the question?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, it says teacher shortage in targeted areas and just depend, who's going to pick what the targets are? Is it the Department of Education? Is it the College Community Board? Is it the state board? Is it local school board? So I think we just need to figure out what that information is going to look like. And we know it's going to change from year to year, but I think we need a consistent method of figuring out who's going to be qualified.
Mr. Chairman,
ahead, Michael.
Representative Clausen. Currently, my expectation is that we would work with the Professional Teaching Standards Board, which is the preface to that particular section. And then we'd also work with other stakeholders, the Department of Education, and so forth to do that. What we need to do is revise our rules and to provide for a network of organizations to come up with those targeted areas.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Michael, so based off of the original language, it would have just said other identified teacher shortage areas as opposed to in targeted areas. You guys have already got rules that specifically line up with what we're trying to do here. I'm not understanding the purpose of putting it in targeted areas. I see the value of potentially having that, but I think the original language was there that offers you guys the authority to do what you guys have already been doing when this was up and running in 2016. Is that correct?
Go ahead,
Mr.
Mike.
Chairman, Representative Brown, that is partially correct. If you go back to page 2 of the bill, you'll notice that this program had specific targeted areas originally. When those are removed, there may be a little more flexibility provided, but then that will likely require additional work to make sure that we're getting those areas most in need, absent any of these specifications for special ed, math, science, that sort of, and so forth.
Go ahead, follow up.
Representative Henderson, based off of this, your intention for this bill, is it to get teachers in general, or is it to get targeted teachers in specific areas?
Go ahead, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question. I think it's a combination of both. Frankly, we have a lot of good things happen in different parts of the state. And so, for example, one particular district might be a benchmark district for pre-grade 3 reading skills, or another district might be a benchmark school district for something else. And so I think I use the word targeted because it is more flexibility, it is a wider latitude. But I don't think we want it to have like world hunger and be everything. I think we want to have a process that brings us back in to hone in on those areas where the need exists, remembering that the objective of the bill is to provide an opportunity with options for the individuals who think, hey, I want to become a certified teacher, I want to move up from being classified to certified, or I want to get an endorsement in a specific area.
Mr. Chairman, last follow-up?
Last follow-up.
Maybe then.
Oh, no, I heard it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I would question you, Representative Henderson, based off of the reading of this, so we could say something similar. I'm worried about targeted, but if we were to say and use the existing language to address identified teacher shortage areas, we're trying to say similar things, but that allows us to not be directly targeted at only these particular areas. It would be anything that would be discovered underneath this rulemaking authority that would be opened up at that point. Would that be amenable to you?
Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, as one of my good co-sponsors on the bill, I think that's an excellent way to work together to move this forward.
Go ahead, Dr. Caldwell.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and Representative Brown, I think we could work through our rules to make that accommodation. And after hearing this, we have some other rules with some other programs where we were able to work through how to do exactly what Representative Henderson just discussed. So we did that with the Wyoming Works, and we could, and I think we could apply some of that logic to this, including Wyoming's tomorrow.
Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess to answer the question, where are the specific needs, just for background, where, if this were implemented today, would we want to insert this program? If we know from.
Go ahead.
Mr.
Swank.
Chairman, Representative Provenza, I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
Would you like to restate your question, Representative Provenza?
I'll try. Maybe I don't make any sense today. I didn't get to eat lunch. But what I'm trying to understand is, so we have the programs that were identified shortage. And so where are the shortages? Where does this need to be implemented most?
Go ahead, I'm sorry, not Representative, but Dr. Caldwell.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Provenza, I think we could work through, I don't have those specifically, but because of the way Representative Henderson just described that may vary from district to district. What we would want to do is use some sort of structure, a work group, rules writing group, to help us identify what those areas are that is going to allow us to hone in on the most critical ones in an area without casting such a wide blanket. So I would anticipate we would use professional teachers and standard boards, and part of that conversation, Department of Education. We would probably solicit some guidance from superintendents. We have a lot of experience writing rules like that, for example, with Wyoming Works and Wyoming's Tomorrow.
Great. Further questions for the community college people? Okay. So, Representative, you guys are probably safe to get off for a while, but not out of the building. Yeah. Go ahead, Representative Henderson. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss on your bill, or would you like to open it up to comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, thank you. There's been a lot of good questions, a lot of good positive energy. I'd like to keep it going. Thank you.
All right. We'll open up the public comment. And yes, please come up and just fill the chairs up. We'll just go right through this. We've got about 20 minutes, roughly speaking.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I really hadn't planned on speaking on all three bills, but as I listened to the discussion, I have some more thoughts. Why do teachers teach? They teach because in many cases, they see the light go on in kids' eyes and they see them grow. Certainly not all, but many do, and those are the ones you want. Those are the quality teachers that you want to stick around. Along my career in the Navy, I went to school for the Navy Nuclear Propulsion Program in Quonset huts and other World War II temporary buildings. I later taught in buildings like that for a couple of years in the same program. And so teachers are dedicated in a lot of cases. But you know, at the end of the day, a little bit of financial help, like you're talking here, can go a long way toward getting teachers to stay in Wyoming or come to Wyoming and suffer the travails of Interstate 80 and I-25 being closed in January and February, and other things like that. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Questions or comments for Bill Winnie? Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for those kind words.
My pleasure.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you, Bill. PTSB, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Brendan O'Connor, Executive Director of the Professional Teaching Standards Board. I appreciate the opportunity to come before you. I was looking through this earlier today, and certainly PTSB is willing to help in providing whatever information we have. However, I would like the committee to know that we do not have a mechanism for tracking shortages or where we license people. We have no idea if they ever get hired. So that would be one limitation, but we can offer what types of certifications we have issued, whether they're provisional or full licensure and so forth that way. So we're happy to help and work with the Community College Commission and the Department of Education. We already do that. The department works with us in completing federal reporting requirements around shortage areas. And so that might be an area that we would look at, especially in the discussion about targeted areas, but certainly different locations are going to have different needs for their teachers. Additional piece on page 2 that I would like the committee to be aware of. The existing language just identifies the University of Wyoming as the teacher education program, but Central Wyoming College does have an approved Bachelor of Applied Sciences in Early Childhood and Early Childhood Special Education program. So I would like, would not like them to be excluded for eligibility for that. And my office has been contacted by a different institution in the state who is investigating what might need to happen to offer other Bachelor of Applied Sciences. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Great comment. Go ahead, Representative Berger.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Another common college that students go to, or people seeking out a teaching license, is that WGU. Do we want to keep this for in-state universities and our in-state university, and keep it there, and our in-state community colleges? Is that what you're thinking?
Representative Berger, I believe that we should ask the bringer of the bill that question, as it's his purview, so.
Thank
When we
you.
get him back up here, we'll ask him that same question. Brendan, there is on page 3, it says, I'm trying to find it again, here it is, that it actually starts on page 3, line 10. The report required under the subsection shall include information submitted by the Professional Teaching Standards Board regarding the impact on the program. Are you saying when you first started talking that you would work in conjunction with the community colleges to help that and that help that portion get put together? It kind of sounds like you're writing the report when it says the report shall, under the subsection, it shall include. So I'm trying to figure out your position on this. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I am trying to figure out my position on that as well, because as I said, we don't have any data. We don't collect that type of data to say we help this many fill this many shortage areas. So we would be happy to provide. And as one reading, I'm deferring to the Community College Commission here for those who are just listening in on that. We would provide whatever we can help in that report, but my reading of it is that the commission would be submitting the report.
That was kind of what, so, Mr. Swank, I'll ask the same question. Do you think that the community college should be writing the report and that the PTSB would be working with you to collaborate with it in any way that they can? Is that kind of how you interpret this? It's kind of a different language, so go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, the language that you reference in the bill is actually currently in statute. So it's obviously before my time at the commission, and this program sunset originally in 2016. My understanding is that we would submit the report and work with Professional Teaching Standards Board and any other partner that would provide information to make sure that the program is properly reported in its function and its success to you.
We'll work an amendment to say something along that line then. Thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add when you're, being as you got the mic?
Mr. Chairman, yes. Trying to do too many things at once, so Dr. Caldwell reminded me of one particular issue. If you go to the last page, or I should say page 4, the last section, section B, this particular language related to a 5% administrative amount has been with the program since its inception. The particular challenge with this clause is not that we're trying to spend a lot of money on administration. This particular program, along with others that we administer, the Wyoming Adjunct Professor Program, as well as the Wyoming Investment in Nursing, students potentially have a very long payout period on their loans. So for example, we currently still have 10 individuals in this program, even though it sunset in 2016, that are still in repayment. However, the amount that was appropriated was not from the School Foundation Program was not enough to continue administering those loans and has since reverted. We are currently paying for that loan administration out of our state general funds. So we understand the purpose for this clause. The challenge is that if students do not do a work repayment, the administrative fees do go on until those loans are repaid. And I believe of the 10 that are currently in repayment, the latest maturity date is 2028. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It's good information. Thank you. Anybody have any questions for community college or PTSB? Sorry, go ahead, Representative Brown.
So you guys, this was both before you were here, and so this is tough. But clearly there was something being done between PTSB and the Community College Commission between 2005 and 2016. Do you guys have that information that would then allow for subsection N to figure out how to work this? Because I understand where you're coming from, Brendan. I think this is kind of a sticky situation, but I also don't think we have to reinvent the whole wheel. So is there something out there that you guys can rehash from 6-7 years ago that we can make work?
Gentlemen?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, I've spent the morning looking in our records and I do not see anything related to this. So.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Brown, I'll go back and look and see what reports we did file and what information was contained in those.
Okay. Go ahead, Representative Obermuller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Does this bill improve on page 3, line 16? In your opinion, does this bill get improved by putting a period on line 16 after the word shortage and striking the in targeted areas?
Mr. Chairman, by
Either of you.
the glance, it looked like it was directed at me. Yes, I would say that keeping it a little bit broader, I wasn't clear on what the targeted areas were either.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Further questions? Thanks, guys.
Mr. Chairman, Boyd Brown, Wyoming School Boards Association. I'm also a recovering superintendent from 3 different districts across the state. One was the largest and one was the smallest district in the state. So again, supporting this bill, and I think the idea that Representative Obermuller just stated is a good idea. There are different needs in different areas based on the size of the district, based on their proximity to different places. I would tell you that in Northeast Wyoming, the school that is in the Black Hills does a great job teaching students reading in elementary school. So there's probably a smaller, if those people want to stay in that area, a smaller group of elementary teachers and reading teachers that you would need. I would tell you statewide, some of the things that are in shortage are math and science sometimes. We also have a shortage in music teachers, foreign language teachers. But in the smallest district in the state where I was at last year, I would say that we had a shortage in almost every area. And if we had the opportunity to get somebody to go into a loan program that we felt was a quality person and did a great job with kids, it would probably be that way. So I think that there's probably the opportunity to work with each district. And I know that the superintendents would be willing to fill out a form that we only had one person apply for this. Would it meet the shortage, or we only had 2 people apply for it, or whatever we want to do there. But I think some rulemaking through the community college would be great. And I know that the Wyoming Association of School Administrators and the Wyoming School Boards Association would be happy to work with them on some of the rulemaking. And with that, I'll answer questions.
Questions for Boyd Brown? Go ahead, Representative Clausen.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Brown, good to see you. This may or may not be for you, but my question is, that this talks about student loan repayment. Different students are going to have different loan amounts. And I don't know how this was brought up and worked out in the past. Do you have any idea, was there a cap on the dollar amount? Did it matter if you had 10,000 or 50,000?
Dr. Brown, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Clausen, I don't have a good working idea of how that worked. I know that at districts that I was at, we used the program. And I do believe that there's a work, if you work X amount of years in Wyoming, you don't have to repay as much. And if you decide not to, you do. So again, I just tertiary know enough about that to probably get myself in trouble.
Any other questions for Dr. Brown? Thank you, sir. Please go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, my name's Mike Smith. I represent the University of Wyoming, and I won't take much time other than just to add our voice of support for this effort and to highlight, Mr. Brown mentioned some of the shortage areas. The one that grabs our attention quite a bit is CTE instructors, and something that we've all been working on for a long time to try to improve. There's an example. But really, I also want to highlight just an attrition issue throughout the state. That was exacerbated through COVID and other things where we're just losing our teachers. And so it's not only just an attraction, but it's can we keep the good ones around that are already with us? And so the University of Wyoming's working on that kind of a master educator plan and program. And my at least initial view of this is folks in that program may also qualify for this. So kudos and happy to work with everybody who's been at this table to address this situation going forward. And I'd stand for any questions.
I actually have a question I'm going to aim at both yourself and Dr. Caldwell, and that is that if a student had started into the university or the community college system and had worked its way into a degree and then changed and had to lose a semester or two, how much of this loan repayment program, I guess, are we going to put towards college education? I mean, somebody could rack up $10,000, $12,000 and then go, oh, but I could get it repaid if I. So that's my question.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
I'm going to restate that question to make sure I understood it. So you're wanting to know what happens if a student is accessing the scholarship in a teacher prep program and then decides to change their major?
Okay, that's one side of it. The other side of it is, what if I'm an ag student working into it and I develop a pretty good substantial student loan, and then I decide, well, if I become a teacher, I could get that loan repaid. So that's both sides of that coin.
Mr. Chairman, I will answer both sides of that question then. I will start with if the student initially starts in that has the loan, because it is a loan, it falls under the truth in lending laws. And so that student, if they do change the major, they can defer repayment for a time while they're in school, but then they have to go back into repayment once they enter into a separate field. So that is spelled out to students when they enter in and sign on to it, because it does fall under the truth in lending. The second question to that is if a student has student loans in their name provided under a different loan funding source, this would not qualify to repay that, because those are separate funding structures, and a loan for applied to and credited for a different purpose. However, Mr. Chairman, I did want to at least somewhat answer the question that the good Representative Clouston asked, and that was about, I'm trying to get this in my head, what happens to the student? Is there a limit on that? We have all of that information outlined. I don't have it off the top of my head right now. Part of it is in rules, and part of it is due to the amount that is available at that time for awarding. But there are some sidebars on that, and I can get that information. I say I can, but probably the good Mr. Swank behind me will get that information. We can provide it to you so that you have it, but that is actually considered and provided more in the current rules and the way it's structured.
Okay. Do you have any more comments you'd like to make? Anybody have any questions for anybody? You get 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Yep, sorry, thanks,
Representative
Mr.
Berger.
Chairman. Real quick, Mr. Smith and Mrs. Caldwell, during whenever this was enacted back in 05 to 16, did you see teacher education programs enrollments up and this working at that time?
Go ahead, Dr. Caldwell.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Berger, there were about 100 students over that time frame from the time it was passed, rules were in place, and the scholarships were awarded. So about a 10-year period in which there were about 100 students. And I don't have right off the top of my head how many of those entered into a payment structure. We have about 10 that are in the process. I would have to break that down to how many went into the teaching profession and how many chose a different repayment status in our state. In terms of how did it impact the teacher program, One of the things that did impact, and I can, without hard numbers, but I can give you a general sense, it did help those students in particular who were already working in the school districts and wanted to go into that. Now, we have a wonderful program now with the teacher apprenticeship program that's going to accelerate that. That was the primary user, but it was not exhaustive, I can assure you that. I would have to go find out what those numbers are.
Further questions? You guys have further comments?
Mr. Chairman, I do have one final comment, and that has to do with the VAS programs. We do have the one at Central Wyoming College, and I certainly appreciate Executive Director O'Connell bringing that one up, because we do have that at the community colleges. Right now, the BAS that is for the CTE teacher prep at the university is done in collaboration with the community colleges. So it's certainly one of those programs that we want to make sure is covered. Right now, I think it does only specify the university and the consideration of the early childhood education program at Central would be
So if we make-
appreciated.
Excuse me, Dr. Caldwell, if we just make an amendment that says including the Wyoming, or just comma after University of Wyoming and Wyoming Community College System, that should cover everybody.
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir.
Thank you. Further questions for, and Aaron, do you have any comments?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Erin Taylor with the Wyoming Association of Community College Trustees. I just wanted to get up here and express my support for this idea. I think what you've heard today from the stakeholders involved is that there's a little dusting off to do and some information to gather, but it sounds like a good path forward. And I appreciate the comment from my good colleague right here, as I whispered in her ear, that that would be a good addition to make to the bill with those BAS programs rolling right now. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. Happy to provide any information as you need as this bill continues.
Thank you. Committee, do you have any questions for anybody on the hot seats? You're all good. Thank you. Anybody else want to comment on the bill? Further public comment? Going once? Going twice? Okay, we'll close down public comment. And committee, what's your pleasure?
Move the bill.
Moved by Brown, seconded by Provenza. Okay, committee, page 1. Is there anything you'd like to, and I'm sorry, Representative Clauston, you did have a question for the bringer, or maybe it was Representative Berg had a bringer. Berger had a question for the.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, but it's been answered.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so anything on page 1, committee? Okay, page 2. Go ahead, Representative Provenza.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to amend line 6 to include after University of Wyoming and Wyoming Community Colleges, and allow LSO to make any changes if that's necessary.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we, moved by Provenza, seconded by Brown, that we add in the Wyoming Community College System. Any comments? Questions? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that amendment is in. Any other amendments on page 2? Page 3.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Brown.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to do some goofy writing here. I think I've already got most of this over to Diana if this moves forward. But I would move on page 3, line 16. We would reinsert identified. And then you would have teacher shortages. We would add an S to shortage. And then strike the remainder of in targeted areas.
And a period after us.
S, yep.
Second.
Been moved and seconded that we reinsert identified and add an S on the shortages with a period. Any comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay, so I would like to make an amendment that we take this from line 4 on page 3 down to somewhere around line 14 and work with the LSO to incorporate what is going on today in the organizations of the community college and PTSB.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
While I understand that we want to do that, I think the best opportunity, Mr. Chairman, I'll just second your motion just so we can talk about it.
Good, second.
Okay. Well, I recognize that, and I thought about striking in, and just saying, do we really need another report? I think we do. I think this is a good idea, but I think there's nothing going on right now, right? There's absolutely nothing actually occurring because this program is sunsetted, so putting anything in there besides keeping what we have here, I think the direction is pretty clear. I think PTSB as well as the department or, the commission will be able to work their way through this. May not be perfect, but I think that they can work their way through it.
They're nodding their heads. You're good.
Yeah.
So I have a motion on the floor. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those against?
No.
And we killed that motion. Okay. We're back on page 4.
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Brown.
I would move to strike lines 18 through 22 on page 4.
Second.
Okay, so been moved by Brown, seconded by Provenza. How are you going to fund the community college to be able to track the dollars?
Mr. Chairman, all this is doing is restricting the 5%. So they'll still have the amount available. This is just restricting the 5% overhead.
Got it.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to build on that, you see in here that this is designed to set it up, be authorized again, but also to become part of the standard budget. And those kind of things are going to be considered, I'm sure, in the next input.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we strike lines 18 through 22. Moved by Brown, seconded by, was it you? Yes, it was. Representative Obermuller.
Question.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Just myself, no. Anything on page 4? Any? Go ahead.
I was just gonna make a joke, never mind.
Okay. Is there any comments on the bill?
Question.
There you go. Question being called. We'll proceed to vote.
Representative Allred?
Aye.
Representative Andrew?
Aye.
Representative Berger?
Aye.
Representative Brown?
Aye.
Representative Clausen? Representative Lawley?
Aye.
Representative Obermuller?
Aye.
Representative Provenza?
Aye.
Chairman Northrup?
Aye.
That's 9 ayes, do pass with amendments.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Committee, we have been having morning education of the Education Committee meetings. And because we're so tied up this week, we're not gonna do them this week, but we'll start up next Monday.
Except
So-
maybe one Wednesday on my.
Anyway,
We adjourn it?
we're adjourned.